This is Wheelbearings. I'm Dan Roth.
And I'm Sam Abuel Samad. This week coming to you from Los Angeles, almost Los Angeles International Airport.
There are worse places to be. I suppose you'd like to be there at a different time of year than like August. But
sometime other than fire season. But
all year is fire season.
There's not much smoke around here right now. So
right. And we're also joined this week by a friend of the podcast, Casey Liss.
Hello. How are you guys?
We're excellent. Thank you for tearing yourself away from your beautiful expanding brood to spend some time talking cars with us.
The pleasure is always mine. I give you guys a lot of crap because you record later than I'm used to. But if anyone is worth it, it is you two fine gentlemen. So I appreciate you having me back on.
And the bullshit starts right away.
Flattery will get you. No, you know what?
Pretty much everywhere.
I just want to get invited back, you guys.
Yeah, because
you're always welcome back here.
We're that illustrious. Hey, whatever. I'll take it. Anyway, while we've got your attention, Casey, what have you been driving?
Right. So in the last month, I have been driving a Volkswagen Golf R, which you'll hear me pronounce about 84 different ways because my brain, for some reason,
4 letters in there. How many different ways can you possibly pronounce?
I'm driving the Volkswagen Golfer?
Yeah, the Golfer, the Volkswagen Golfer.
The Golfer.
No, I keep wanting to pronounce it like the body of water between Texas and Florida, and I don't know what this is in my brain that just cannot get it right. So you'll probably hear me call it the Golf R, even though it's, I guess, more like the game where you hit the little white ball around, which is a golf.
You know who has the weirdest pronunciations ever? Car salesman. I heard a car salesman they'd call the Jetta Carrot was the carrot, or the other way around, I forget, back in the day. And then there's like my brother was looking at a Hyundai Tucson, and the salesman insisted on calling it the Tucson. And you're like,
oh gosh,
what?
That is just so wrong.
Yeah. So maybe you're becoming a car salesman.
Yeah, I'm a hop, skip, and a jump away.
But, really though, Casey, calling it, or pronouncing it golf is not entirely wrong, because the name golf actually has nothing to do with the game where you spoil a good walk.
It's a wind, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually derived from the Gulf Stream.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's
like most of VW's names from the 70s through the 90s. Most of their naming came from various winds, like the Gulf Stream, the Scirocco.
I didn't know that was a wind.
The Vento.
Yeah. So
wait. How does the Santana fit in?
However you want.
How does the Santana or the Passat? Is the Passat a wind?
I'm not sure about that one.
But yeah,
while Casey's talking, I'll consult the market, the great Google.
Oh, there you go. Passat, the German word for trade wind.
Oh,
trade wind.
Today I learned.
Yeah.
I thought it was the German word for broken. All right.
Well, there is that too. I mean, the Passat that we owned was by far and away the most unreliable car I've ever had for the whole 9 years that we had it.
Let me tell you about my 335. But anyway, so I drove.
The Passat did not cost me anywhere near as much money as you have spent on keeping that 335 on the road.
Yeah, well, it's currently a fixture of my driveway, and I just need to get rid of it. I just haven't had the time. But I digress again. I have been driving the Golf R, and actually just today I got a GTI loaner, so I've spent a few minutes with that. But I had a week with the Golf R, and if you're not familiar with who I am or what my deal is, I have a 335 6-speed X-Drive M Sport. It's 2011, and I love my car, but I've put about $10,000 in repairs into it, and BMW has foot the bill for another like $5,000 or so. So needless to say, it's time for it to go. And I've been wondering what to get to replace it. And there's a lot of discussion around this that you can listen to on my podcast if you're so interested. And I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes. But the short version is I want something that's kind of fast, has 4 doors, has CarPlay, and has 3 pedals, which that last requirement really ruins everything. And so through a series of meandering ideas, including being pretty convinced I wanted a brand new JL Wrangler, I have eventually concluded I'm pretty sure that if we decide to be a two-car family, which we have been for a long time, but I'm working from home now, so we may not need to be. If we decide to be a two-car family, it's probably going to be a Golf of some flavor. And I'm currently thinking the Golf R, but let me tell you, even in 40 minutes with GTI, it turns out the GTI is a great car. Why didn't anyone say that in the last 20, 30 years?
I don't know what those two guys that keep telling you it's better. I don't know. Not sure what's up with them.
I mean, it's one of those sleepers that nobody ever talks about. It just kind of falls through the cracks whenever this kind of conversation comes up.
Well, what's funny though is like the GTI. The GTI is one of those cars that just consistently gets mentioned. Like a GTI 3 Series, Miata. Those are all sort of some of the greatest hits, and the reason why is because they are consistently very good at what they do, generation after generation, and. It's not that we're on the take or anything, or we've, we've got some sort of like weird cult. It's just the GTI. Anybody who's spent any time with it is convinced like it's just a very good, well-rounded car hatchback. That's
I mean, it's like the 3 Series was for decades.
Yeah,
it got to the point where you just expected it to be excellent, and when it wasn't. That's when people started to notice, it just, it became something different.
Yeah, it occurred to me, even after the short amount of time I spent driving it today, that to my eyes and for my money, if you wanted a single car that will do almost anything and do it reasonably well, I am hard pressed to find a better option than the GTI. If you just take everything into consideration, price, luxury, performance, size, space within it, everything. The GTI certainly has drawbacks, don't get me wrong, but as a almost perfect, or I should say it is an almost perfect, just middle of the road, does everything reasonably well. I would argue it may not do a lot extremely well, but it does everything reasonably well. That being said, it has been a long time since I've driven a front-wheel drive car with any amount of power. And, oh God, do I hate it? I hate it so hard.
Well, you have to train yourself, right? Like it's a different driving style. It really is that slow in, fast out. You've got to set up the rotation before you get back on the power, which is completely opposite of rear-wheel drive. Well, maybe not completely opposite, but you want to do, you want to sort of trail brake. You want to hit the brakes, get the rotation happening, then get back on the power versus like you can sort of fudge it with the rear wheel drive car. You're like,
and moreover, remember that, I just said that my 335 is an X-Drive, so it's an all-wheel drive car. Before that, I had a Legacy GT all-wheel drive, and both of these are reasonably quick cars that in almost any situation, I could stand on the gas and mostly things would be all right. And the Golf R was even more of that, with the brand new stability control and my car's stability control. So it's mostly fine as well. But, with the stability control and this Haldex system that I want to hate so badly, but it's actually really good. I could come into a turn with way too much steering input and way too much throttle and give it more throttle during the turn. And the R would just figure it out in a way that was just intoxicating. And the problem, if I were to argue against the R, I think the problem with that is it's easy to get yourself into either dangerous or illegal territory very quickly, in contrast to something like the Toyota Baru, where you can be at 10/10 at like 30 miles an hour,
Yeah.
So, no, and you're absolutely right. And that's, kind of the complaint I have about a lot of modern cars is that they're too good. When I drove the R and the GTI back to back on the track earlier this year, I had that same feeling that the R is really good, but it kind of does everything for you. Whereas as somebody that actually likes to drive, the GTI, you can toss it around a little more. And you can, depending on how you drive it, manipulate it more. Whereas the R just kind of does it. You just kind of cruise through the corners, and get on the gas and drive out of them. And, the GTI lets you, it's a little bit lighter. It feels a little more lively, and it'll do stuff in response to how you control it. And if you control it well, it's really rewarding to drive. Whereas the R, to me, just felt, yeah, it's a little bit quicker, but it didn't feel as fun.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that. And perhaps what I'm teaching myself between these two cars is that I'm not nearly as skilled a driver as I thought I was. But what I liked about the R is that I could be ham-fisted with it and survive. And I don't think I have the skill level, especially with a front-wheel drive car, but probably with any car, to really get the GTI to dance the way I want it to. And interestingly, and I've only driven the GTI about half an hour, 40 minutes, and I had the R for a week. The GTI didn't feel particularly lighter to me, and it didn't feel particularly more nimble to me. But again, consider that I've only driven it for about half an hour, and I had 2 children in the car, so I wasn't exactly flogging it at the time.
Oh, what's the matter with you? It's not a good driver if they don't vomit.
That's right. I kid you not. This is a hand on heart. This is a true story. We had just gotten back. I know it was before I'd driven the GTI. I was like putting the car seats in it, and my 3.5-year-old said to me, Daddy, sometimes mommy gets frustrated when you drive, and you should just drive more like her, because she always drives perfectly. It's like, come on, man. You're 3.5. How are you already doing this to me?
Yeah.
But I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just learning that I'm a crummy driver, and I just never wanted to admit it. But the ultimately, and I don't mean to bogart this entire episode, but as it turns out, who knew that modern Volkswagens, if you can get past all the emission stuff, and I know that's more raw for some of us.
None of these are diesels, so.
Yeah, exactly. And I know that's a little raw for you, Sam, but nevertheless, I mean,
no, it's not raw at all. I mean, I got a pretty nice check from
you were made whole. But no, on the inside, they're so nice. And the Golf R felt like a $40,000 car in a lot of ways.
Because it is.
No, I mean that mostly complimentary, that it didn't feel like it was a $30,000 car with a $40,000 price tag. Oh, I see. It felt like it was a $40,000 car. Except in a couple ways. I'm really grumpy and bitter that a sunroof is not offered in the United States. It is overseas, but it is not in the United States, which really chaps my butt. But nevertheless, all in all, I thought the Golf R felt like about the price it was supposed to be. This is in contrast, however, to the GTI, which is almost entirely the exact same car, except it can have a sunroof. And it can have some of the parking aids that the Golf R, or at least the 6-speed Golf R, which is what I had. It does not have some of these parking aids. And I feel like the GTI, which I've understood, the MSRP is a little over 30, maybe as much as $35,000. But from what I can tell, you can get out the door in a brand new GTI for maybe under 30 or a little over 30 if you get a really well loaded, like an Autobahn or whatever. And I tell you what, this does not feel like a $30,000 car. It feels like a $35,000, $40,000 car. The interior is very well done. It's very logical. Switchgear all feels good. The infotainment is good. Everything about it feels really, really good. And in between the Golf R and the GTI, I actually took a friend's 2018 CR-V for a week when they were out of town. And that car, there was a lot that I liked about it and a lot that I didn't. But I didn't feel like it felt nearly as nice on the inside, and they're roughly the same money. That CR-V as option, the particular one I had, was about $30,000, and I am in a GTI Autobahn, so I think the MSRP is like 32, 33, something like that. And again, I feel like the GTI on the inside, it just feels like it should be a $35,000, $40,000 car.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's always been, long been one of the things about Volkswagens, that especially the ones. With a few exceptions, like the previous generation Jetta, when it, the first couple of years after it launched, and also the current U.S. market Passat. But in general, Volkswagens have always felt more premium inside than many of their direct competitors. Then there was always so much to like about them. They were great cars they've always been great cars to drive. I mean, the two that my wife and I owned, were great to drive. The only issue I've ever had with them has been the reliability, which has been challenging. But even that, Volkswagen has now addressed that, with a 6-year bumper to bumper warranty. So, the one thing that always made me hesitate in recommending a VW, a modern VW to anybody, has been addressed by Volkswagen, so that at least it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg to fix stuff. And presumably, the fact that they are confident enough to offer a warranty like that means that they have addressed a lot of those issues. At least I hope so for their sake, because otherwise it's going to be very expensive for them. But so I think if you really like that car, I don't see any reason not to get one.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, what do I want a GTI or do I want an R? And sitting here today, 40 minutes and one day and 40 minutes of driving into having the GTI, I'm still leaning toward the R because, again, apparently I'm a really crummy driver. And beyond that, I think I would miss some of the features that the GTI has, like the sunroof, which I really want. I would miss that sometimes. I live in Virginia, where it is pretty warm for most of the year. But I would miss the sunroof sometimes, but I think I would miss the power and the all-wheel drive all the time. Not all-wheel drive on account of like snow or anything, just all-wheel drive on account of, as we discussed earlier, the way it handles and the way it feels. But I don't know. I'm quickly finding myself falling in love with the GTI, which is really uncomfortable because a couple of dear friends of mine have had them on and off over the years and have told me, no, you need to at least try a GTI. You need to try a GTI. You need to try a GTI. And I've been resisting successfully for years. And I'm going to have to go to them hat in hand and eat crow and say, you know what? It turns out the GTI was good. Again, why didn't you guys tell me?
Well, the thing you can do, is you can always practice your driving skills and get better at that.
That's true.
Over time, come to really appreciate what the GTI can offer you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But with that being said, unless you guys have anything else about the Volkswagen, I'd love to hear what you've been in lately.
Okay. Well, I've been, since we last recorded, in two different cars. I had this little red hybrid that was really sweet looking. It wasn't quite as affordable as a GTI. It was the Lexus LC500H.
That is such a pretty car.
Oh, it is. I mean, it is by far the best looking car that Lexus or Toyota, for that matter, have ever built. I mean, it's just stunning, especially in that red color that the one I had is in. And that's actually the same color. Last year I had the V8 powered LC500, the standard one. And it's the same color, and it still just looks fantastic, especially when it's gleaming in the sunshine, which it was the entire time I had it. This one is the hybrid variant. So instead of the 5-liter V8 with 465 horsepower, it's got a 3.5-liter V6, naturally aspirated V6 running Atkinson cycle like most hybrids, and some electric assist. And it's interesting, the new version of the hybrid system that they're putting on these rear drive Lexuses now, Lexi.
No, Lexuses.
Yeah. Is actually more akin to the old GM two-mode hybrid system that they had on the trucks and utilities back in the latter part of the previous decade.
For like a hot minute.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, they were in production for about 6 years.
What?
The Escalade hybrid, they kept selling those until I think 2013.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, it was actually around for quite a while.
It was also super expensive.
Yeah. Well, the Tahoe, Yukon, Silverado, and the GMC and Chevrolet versions, those actually were discontinued earlier, but apparently the Escalade hybrid was actually surprisingly popular. I mean, it wasn't a huge seller, but it had a decent take rate, and so they kept building them right up until the end of that generation of Escalade, and then when they redesigned the Escalade in about 2014, it finally got discontinued. But so that means this one's got 2 planetary gear sets, 2 motor generators. It unfortunately does not make as much power as the V8. It's only 354 horsepower combined. But it's still it's got, because of the electric drive from the hybrid system, it's got great off the line acceleration. It just once you get past about 50 miles an hour, it starts to lose a little bit of steam relative to what the V8 does, but it still drives really well. And it got shockingly good fuel economy. I got 27 miles per gallon with this thing over 6 days of driving it, which, surprised the heck out of me.
That's impressive for a car that size with that mission, probably driven the way you drove it.
What are you implying, Dan?
I'm implying that, you've got to test and really see what these systems are going to do and how they're going to, deliver on the promise that they're making.
Testing and so on.
Yeah.
Something like that. How can you? I got to go back though to the look of this. The profile, beautiful. The butt, nice. The big mouth bass front fascia. Are you kidding me with this? Why is Lexus doing this? It's so ugly.
I think on a couple of cars, it doesn't work on every one of their models. Like on the RX, I'm not particularly fond of it. But on the LC and the LS, I think it really works. And I think part of that, is because they're, on the utilities, I think is where it kind of falls apart, where it's up higher, where the nose is up higher. But when you see that, when you walk up to it, and you're kind of looking down on it, it looks so much better. It's just, I think it's a better execution on the cars than it is on the utilities. But, it's a matter of taste. If you don't like it, you don't like it. And that's not a problem.
I can buy what you're saying about it being low versus high. I have not seen one of these in person. And I agree with you that it definitely does not work on the SUVs. But I will tentatively accept, sir, that on the cars, it's not as bad.
Okay. So anyway, when I drove the V8 last year, the way I described it, is as a classic Grand Touring coupe. It's not a sports car. I mean, it's fairly hefty. The V8, the LC V8 is, I think, about 4,100 pounds. This one's about another 150 pounds on top of that. So it's not a lightweight, but it is fast and it handles shockingly good. For what it is, and so I described it as a Grand Touring coupe. More along the lines of some of the classic GTs, like Aston Martins or even the Ferrari Daytona of the 1970s. Actually, it's probably quicker than the Daytona ever was. Just because it's more modern.
Camry's probably quicker than the Daytona ever was.
That's true. But that said, when seeing automakers put a back seat in cars like this, and put seat belts and stuff in there, it's just like, why bother? It's not usable by anybody. You can't. I mean, there's a latch system in there, so nominally you can install a car seat.
Listen, as an auto writer, I used to relish stuffing like the Britax Marathon seats back there, which are giant, and you'd use the latch anchors, and I'd get the whole family in the car that's not supposed to actually have those seats used. I like the RX-7, RX-8, R3.
RX-8.
Yeah, the R3 with all the big Recaros. Yeah, we had everybody in that at one point. It was a little tight. But
I didn't hate my kids the way you do.
Yeah, that's probably true. Very few people hate their children as efficiently as
personally. What I would rather see, is to see a manufacturer like Toyota say, "Okay, we're not going to do this nonsense. We're just going to put a really nicely upholstered package shelf in there. But maybe put the latch mechanism in there so you could put the seat in there. But." You don't need the seat padding and the seat belts and everything for that anyway. So, put in the latch system so you can install the car seats. And then, you might even have a little more clearance there so that the kid's not kicking you in the back of your seat. Actually, in your case, Dan, you probably wouldn't notice anyway.
Right. Because I'm like snugged right up. Everybody's always like, why do you sit so close? I'm like, A, people don't sit close enough to actually control the car. And B, I have stubby little legs, so I have to sit close. There's got to be some sort of tax advantage or classification reason.
I think it's probably an insurance thing. They probably would have higher insurance premiums if it was a 2-seater versus a nominal 4-seater.
Oh.
But the thing is, what would make this really great as a Grand Touring car would be to be able to make it more useful for a weekend getaway with your partner, or a road trip. And the problem is, the car only has a 4 cubic foot trunk. So
did you say 4?
Yeah, it's 4 cubic feet.
Oh,
Very
my
shallow.
word.
You can barely fit, a carry-on bag in there.
Why is it so shallow?
I'm not entirely sure. The V8 was the same way. So, I mean, it's not really the battery that's taking up all that space, but it's just a very shallow trunk.
I mean, that's like a glove compartment, 4 cubic
feet. Yeah, I mean, so I'd rather have. I mean, you can throw bags in the back seat,
right?
But it would be nicer if it was just a nice upholstered package shelf, instead of having it rolling around in the back seat. But that's my only real complaint about this car. And in fact, considering who the likely market is for this car, or who many of the buyers are going to be for this car, they would probably, even though it's not going to be as quick as the V8, they would probably actually prefer this one because it's it doesn't have that growl of the V8, but it's a little more refined. It's quieter. So most of the people that are going to spend $100,000 on this thing are probably going to appreciate that more silent feeling. And when it's in EV mode, it is really quiet. Even when you put it in sport mode though, and stand on it, the V6 has a little bit of a growl, but not much. It's not nearly as aggressive as the V8.
They haven't piped fake engine sounds through the audio system yet.
No.
Good for them.
Good for them. So I dropped that one off at the airport on Sunday before I headed to California for this trip I've been on this week. And when I got to San Francisco, I picked up another hybrid. It's a hybrid, but it's not quite like the hybrid you're going to talk about, Dan. It's the Honda Clarity fuel cell. And let's just say the Clarity design is somewhat polarizing.
They've actually shown up on the roads here in Massachusetts, and they're not as weird as you'd think, though. Like they look.
Well, there's actually. I'm surprised. There's a lot of them around here, or at least in North Bay. I've seen a couple here in LA area, but there's a lot of them in the Bay Area around San Francisco. And in fact, a lot of them are the fuel cell version. Honda actually sells the Clarity in 3 different variants. There's the fuel cell version, which is only available in like the San Francisco Bay Area,
right.
And in Southern California between Los Angeles and San Diego, because that's pretty much the only place where there's hydrogen stations to fill them. And then there's also a battery electric version, which has an unfortunately short range of only about 85 miles. And then there's also the plug-in hybrid, which is actually probably the best variant of this, because it has about a 45-mile electric driving range, and then it's basically a hybrid after that. But even the fuel cell is actually a hybrid, because all fuel cell cars actually have a hybrid or have a battery for collecting energy from regenerative braking. So you get a little more efficiency out of it, rather than if you were just using, powering everything off the fuel cell. And then the battery also comes in and does some peak shaving, so that the fuel cell stack doesn't have to work as hard to generate electricity. And that's the thing about fuel cell cars. They actually are electric, but they're electric cars without a plug, and instead, they use the fuel cell to, you put in hydrogen in the tank, and it mixes it with oxygen and converts that into water and electricity.
It's so what is it? Reverse hydrolysis across the membrane, right?
Yeah,
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. It's or electrolysis, not hydrolysis.
Yeah, not hydrolysis. Yeah. And that's freaking space technology.
It literally is,
No,
because it was developed for the space program in the 1960s, and the very first fuel cell car, hydrogen fuel cell car, was built by General Motors in 1966 or 67. The Electrovan, it was a Corvair van, and they used fuel cell technology from the Apollo program, developed for the Apollo program, and put it in this van, and they tested it a little bit. They didn't continue to develop it because it wasn't really practical at that time, but they've continued working on fuel cell technology ever since. And so this is one of 2 fuel cell vehicles currently available in California. The other one is the Toyota Mirai. This one, the Honda, drives a lot better than the Mirai. It drives more like a modern Honda. It's got good handling, good ride quality. It's really quiet, and
Looks better than the Mirai as well.
It's definitely better looking than the Mirai, and it's more practical as well. It's got more interior room. The Mirai is strictly a 4-seater. This one, is got decent room that basically splits the difference between the Civic sedan and the Accord in terms of interior volume. The trunk's a little on the small side. It's only about 11.5 cubic feet, but the interior is good size.
So in terms of,
I got 300 miles of range out of the thing before I had to stop and put some hydrogen in it.
Well, that's not bad. And so that brings me to the point, where hydrogen infrastructure exists, this seems to be eminently practical, and just, sort of like a very normal experience, although it is an electric car and you're sort of dragging the generation station along with you. Which I guess is kind of the same thing as
but on the other hand, when you fill, it takes about 5 minutes to fill the tank with hydrogen,
right?
As opposed to sitting around for a couple of hours or even an hour, at a supercharger station,
right?
You're 5 minutes and you're back on your way again.
And the fuel cells are lighter than a battery pack.
Yeah, no, they are, and they're going to get even lighter. Hyundai is at CES this year. Hyundai introduced their new fuel cell crossover called the Nexo, which just went on sale. It went on sale a couple months ago in Korea, and it'll be coming to the U.S. Early in 2019. And then Honda and General Motors have a joint venture to produce fuel cell stacks in Michigan starting in 2020, and that's the next generation design that the two companies have been working on together. And those will go into new vehicles starting in 2020.
So it's close to being sort of wider production ready. Do you think it's ever going to actually be a thing, though? Because it's like a cart before the horse kind of thing. We don't have the infrastructure. It would take commitment to build that out, commitment and investment. And that really seems like the one stumbling block is installing hydrogen refueling stations.
Yeah, well, both Toyota and Honda invested in a company called True Zero, which was started by Joel Iwanek, the former CMO of General Motors, and he was the top sales guy at Hyundai before that. And many of the public hydrogen stations in California are operated by True Zero. And in fact, one time while I was filling the car with hydrogen, another Mirai pulled up and behind me and was waiting. Fortunately, it only takes a few minutes to fill up, so it wasn't much of a wait. But there's about 36 hydrogen stations open in California right now, and they're opening more all the time. I talked to Steve Center, who's head of environmental affairs at Honda a couple of weeks ago, and he said they're continuing to open more hydrogen stations. But where I see this actually really becoming a more useful alternative, at least in the near term, is when we start to get autonomous vehicles, and have autonomous mobility services, because those vehicles, in order to be economically viable, they're going to want to be running those, constantly 24 hours a day. They want to minimize downtime and, have them constantly generating revenue, which means that they don't, you don't want them necessarily, sitting around for extended periods of time, plugged into a charger. And so one potential solution for those is to make those fuel cell vehicles, because, if you're talking about a fleet that's operating in a geofenced area, you don't need, for a fleet, you don't need very many stations. Unlike for consumer purposes, consumers want easy availability, wherever they are. Whereas, a fleet can more easily get by with, a place like San Francisco, maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 stations to cover a place like San Francisco. They come in, they get refueled, and they're back on the road in 5 minutes, as opposed to, at least an hour for a DC fast charge. And so there may be a viable solution for vehicles like that. And then, the other thing is long haul trucking. You get Nikola Motors developing their fuel cell tractor trailer system, along with Bosch, and they're developing a network of hydrogen stations, crisscrossing the country along the major corridors across the country. And again, unlike Tesla's plans with the Semi and using the mega charger. These things will the hydrogen trucks will be able to be refueled more quickly. But what they're going to be doing is, most of the hydrogen stations today, you get tankers that come in and refill them, much as they do with gasoline. But that's not necessarily going to be practical, going out into the middle of the country, in places like Omaha, Nebraska and Wyoming, when trucks are crossing the country. So what they're going to be doing is putting in hydrogen stations where they produce the hydrogen locally by electrolysis, and they'll be using solar and wind primarily as the power source to produce the hydrogen on site and store it on site.
That seems... Isn't electrolysis like the least efficient way to get hydrogen? Can't you get hydrogen from natural gas?
Yeah, you can. And that's the way most of the hydrogen today is produced. But on the other hand, you can do it. It's not necessarily that electrolysis is. I mean, it's less efficient than steam reformation of gas. But on the other hand, you can do it on site. Whereas you're not going to do steam reformation of natural gas on site at these locations.
At multiple sites, yeah. You know what? Just build a hydrogen pipeline, right? Like, that's what could possibly go wrong. And just put the stations along the pipeline.
I mean, you can do that. And
it's a gas. If it leaks, it'll just,
There are hydrogen pipelines in California, and some of the stations are located near the pipelines and tap directly into the pipeline.
Yeah, and I mean, I say it to be flip, but like honestly, it's not terrible. I'd rather have a hydrogen pipeline than an oil pipeline, quite honestly. But
yeah, well, the one issue with a hydrogen pipeline over long distances, because hydrogen is the hydrogen molecules are so small.
The leakage.
It's harder to have it not seep through the material of the pipe itself. Yeah, that's why local production is actually more practical.
Huh. Well, I mean, that's fascinating. I would love to have a hydrogen fuel cell as another viable propulsion option, because it does seem like the technology is pretty rapidly maturing, and fueling is kind of what's holding it back at this point. And if you're going to use it in large trucks, I think that also makes a lot more sense than battery electric, just out of the sheer weight and bulk and recharge times of that energy unit, right? And
I mean, a battery electric long haul truck, something with a 500-mile range, you're talking a 1 megawatt hour battery probably at least.
Yeah,
that's gonna weigh at least 10,000 pounds.
Oh, yeah, we need to put less weight on the roads, not more. Like you've seen our infrastructure crumble, and a big reason of that is. What was it, the early 80s when the Reagan administration lifted a cap on truck weight, semi-truck weight, so they went above 60,000 pounds.
Well, actually, in all but 3 states, the weight limit is still 40,000 pounds.
Is it? Okay, so
yeah, there are 80,000 pounds, 40 tons, and Michigan and 2 other states allow 80-ton trucks, which is a big part of why our roads are in such bad shape. Because
beat the hell out of the roads. Like it's an exponential sort of damage thing. It's not.
But most long haul trucks are 80,000 pounds, and But the thing is, if you put 10,000 pounds in the battery, that's 10,000 pounds that you're taking away from the payload that the truck can carry. So that means less revenue.
No, but it also means more trucks. Because if you're moving 80,000 pounds, well, all of a sudden you need an extra truck every 8 trucks, right? Like to carry.
Yeah. I mean, the net difference is probably going to be somewhat, compared to a diesel truck, is going to be somewhere in the, around probably 7,500 to 8,000 pounds extra, because, you got to take into account that you're replacing the diesel engine and the gas or the diesel tanks, but still it's going to be significantly heavier, which so it's going to take away from the payload, and it's going to mean more trucks on the road. Yeah,
and I mean the accidents are going to be spectacular, though. I mean, it's
all right. What about you, Dan?
I was going to say, speaking of heavy trucks, that's a really good segue, because Last week, I think I mentioned it just briefly, but I was driving the Ford Expedition Platinum Max. I think that's the right order for the words.
I think it's Max Platinum.
Max Platinum. Either way, the Ford Expedition Max, which is the long wheelbase, I think it's 131 inches or something.
It makes Casey's wife's Volvo look small.
Yeah, it sure does. The Volvo would fit in between the wheelbase, I think.
Oh my word!
It's a big vehicle, and the Platinum is the top trim level. So while it's not for everyone, it's definitely perfect for the people that it's for. And the Expedition, it's a traditional SUV, and those traditional values are undeniably attractive. As I was driving this thing, I felt like, I could drag an RV anywhere I wanted to go. And, I pretty much could have, depending on the towing package, you can drag around about 9,000 pounds with this. I think standard towing is like 6,500 or so. And so that's a pretty good range, 9,000 pounds. That's a lot of weight. Plus all of the payload, inside. And it's huge inside. My kids, had tons of space in the second row. There were captain's chairs with a nice hallway in between. And then the third row was very comfortable. I sat back there, the dog had his own spot. It folds 60/40, so I folded up one side, and he had his own spot where I could strap him in with this little click-it harness, and I was able to leave the dog crate in its like sort of fully assembled upright position. So when we got where we were going, I could just stick him in there, and he wouldn't trash the interior if somebody.
You mean you didn't strap him to the roof?
No. We didn't go to Vermont like Mitt. We went to Maine, actually. And that's a thing that there's the sheer amount of normal life stuff the thing supports. Like the Expedition it's kind of like always the right vehicle. I used it to take my 10-year-old to the Patriots preseason opener, and it was fantastic for that. And like navigating football stadium.
Was it just
traffic.
You and the 10-year-old?
It was, yes. But it's just
so this 131-inch wheelbase SUV is the perfect vehicle to take you and a 10-year-old to a football game.
Yeah, because it's intimidating to the other drivers, and you've got that crush of traffic. And let me explain Gillette Stadium, okay? They built a football stadium, an NFL stadium, with no direct exits off the major routes. So you have two ways to get there. You can go up Route 1. It's a friggin' nightmare because there's lots all the way along, and like the traffic just gets heavier the closer you get to the stupid stadium. Or you can pay for VIP parking and get off on 95 and, go park in the VIP lot, which, you've got to wind through the back neighborhoods of Foxborough. So either way, they've got this NFL stadium sort of, there must be some kind of like political or town deal or whatever that just meant that they don't get an exit because it's so close to Route 95. I don't know why they didn't get an exit off the highway for it, but whatever. So this is a good vehicle for like navigating that crush of other vehicles, and it was comfortable. So even if you're stuck in traffic, you kick on the dynamic cruise control, let it follow the other cars, just crank up the music, and it was super comfortable for that. And if you actually do take a bunch of people to a game and tailgate and stuff like that, it's it's brilliant.
That's where it really comes into its own is for stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because especially if you have the not the captain's chairs, but the bench in the middle in the second row, you can comfortably carry 8 people in that, including the driver.
Very comfortably. Yeah. And that was really, the Expedition hasn't really changed in terms of its recipe over however long it's been built, but it's become more and more refined, and it's very good in this latest generation. And the other stuff we did with it, like, I used it for just general use, and then we just took an impromptu trip because we could. It's like, let's just stick everybody in the thing, and so we headed up to southern Maine to Old Orchard Beach, and then we went down to Wells and Gunkwitch. So it's like along Route 1. There's all these little vacation spots, and it wound up getting late, and so we were like, you know what, we should just find a place to put in for the night. That's pretty hard to do in like vacation land, which is what they have on their plates. Their license plates are like Maine is vacation land. So it's the height of the season. It took us a couple hours to find someplace where we could actually stay. And so the kids were like, well, we could just boondock in the expedition, and which
I was about to ask.
They were kind of down with it. They're like, we're gonna have to park somewhere. I was like, I don't really want to do that. I mean, we could absolutely. It would have been very comfortable for that. But it's just like those are the traits I think that have always made the traditional SUV so attractive. It's just ready for nearly anything.
Except for parking in a Whole Foods parking lot.
Well, I mean, it has all the cameras and then the self parking system and stuff. Like it'll do its best to help you out. It was not as easy to park as the Subaru Ascent for sure, but it's also bigger. So, as ginormous SUVs go, it was pretty easy to drive, and it's quiet. The EcoBoost engine is just, I mean, that's such a good engine for every truck application because it's so punchy and so powerful. You're not ever waiting for the power curve. It's right there at all times. Very well matched with the 10-speed auto, although there were some times where I was like, all right, you're just shifting because you can. Like, stop it.
That's me with the Golf R.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, I have 10 speeds. Check it out. And it's just like, knock it off. The Platinum has the CCD suspension. So it's a continuously controlled damping or whatever. I think it's I don't think it's MR, but I think it electronically.
No, it's not. It's a variable valving. In the dampers.
Works.
It's still really good.
Oh yeah, it works really well. It rides like butter, but it's not loose or floppy. And that was what really impressed me was you can hustle this thing down a twisty road if you have to keep in mind physics, but you can drive the Expedition Max a lot more sporty than you'd think you can, and it handles very well given its size. It doesn't roll too much. It sort of rolls a bit and takes a set, and then it's very solid, very stable when you're doing things you should not be doing with it. And it's got plenty of power to get you in, from apex to apex. I liked that aspect of it. There were some gimmicks, but you don't have to get them. I didn't like the power folding running boards. I mean, they're handy, but I look at that every time you open the door, it's like, when you close it, and it's just like, that's going to break. And it's going to be expensive to fix. Or it's going to trap crap up there against the rocker panel and cause rust out here where it snows. I liked that. Even in platinum trim, while it's plush, it's almost
actually, Dan, it's not going to rust because that body is aluminum.
It'll corrode. Pardon me.
Well, yeah, but it's not going to rust all the way through. I mean, at most you're going to get some surface oxidation. So if the paint gets scraped, you'll get surface oxidation on the aluminum, and then it stops.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I've seen some aluminum that just turns to dust. maybe not on cars.
I don't think this stuff will, because it's pretty thick aluminum.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so maybe that's okay. Like it is handy to have the running boards, and it's nice that it tucks them out of the way. It probably really does help quite a bit with fuel economy because that's a big source of drag down there.
Right. And it makes it a lot easier to get in and out of that thing.
It sure does. Yeah. It's really nice in the platinum trim. It's almost like how I would want the Lincoln to be. I had the Navigator not too long ago, and that was it presented very well. The materials were better in the Lincoln, and it was pretty. But I found the Expedition actually, which was not quite as over the top, more comfortable by a long shot. Its controls were better. Its seats were better because it didn't have the zillion way adjustable things. Like the first thing I did was I took the headrest out and turned it around and put it back in, so it wasn't pushing my head down. It's a nice, comfortable vehicle equipped this way. And if you don't need the leather and the heated and cooled seats and stuff, you can save yourself some money because it does get pricey. but they've really thought of who uses these vehicles, and they're because these full-size trucks are their bread and butter, they pay good attention to the users, and it was really equipped well. It has a lot of the good driver assist technology, works really well, which is helpful because it's the size of a cabin cruiser. So it really is. It's quite handy. The economy is, don't expect much. It's
better. Let's put it this way: it's better than it was in an Expedition of 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, in the Expedition of 10 years ago, it just it had that modular V8 that was just thirsty and wimpy. This is at least not super thirsty. I think about 16 overall, and it went up to about 19 for the sort of the highway only portions of the trip. So that's not terrible when you consider the size of the vehicle. It's big and it's heavy and it has a lot of capability, and it'd probably be 16 full or empty. You tow something, is probably going to go down significantly, but you're going to have the power to tow.
Actually, under heavy load, it's going to go down quite a bit. That's been one of the knocks on the EcoBoost engines, and that's one of the reasons why they brought the diesel to the F-150. And I'd say it's a safe bet that by sometime in 2019, there will be an Expedition and a Navigator available with that 3-liter diesel engine as well.
Oh, I mean, that's
for customers that want to tow, the diesel fuel economy holds up much better than the EcoBoost does.
Yeah, I mean, that's if you're towing a lot with it, that makes a ton of sense. If you're towing, once or twice a year, this is fine. It's got, the Platinum has a lot of power. It's got more power than the other trim levels, just a little bit low, like a scooch more. I think it's like 480 horsepower and 480 pound-feet of torque or something like that. Yeah,
it's 400
horsepower, right? And 480 pound-feet of torque. The torque is impressive. It's got a lot of torque, a lot, quite a bit.
How's the modern sync systems? I haven't used one in years, and I did not particularly care for it at the time. But it's been a long time since I've used one of them. Yeah,
Sync 3 is what this has, and it's better. What I liked about it was, again, comparing it to the Lincoln, it's not making you go into the screen as much because they have physical controls for a lot of things. So you're good for the stuff that you're most going to adjust. But when you do have to go into the screen, it's a little bit of a click fest. It still needs to be stripped down and flattened out. There's you still have to jump to the home button to get between functions for some things that should have their own buttons and stuff. And it's customizable a bit. So some of that you can mitigate a little bit, where you can move some of the icons around and put the stuff that you want, at your fingertips. But, I wasn't able to master it right off the bat. So it's not.
It is way better than the old My Ford Touch system was.
Yeah, it's miles better.
It's much, the interface is a lot better. It's much more responsive, and it's also set up for over-the-air software updates.
Yeah, and
which,
nice.
They do on a fairly regular basis.
It does, yeah. All of that, responsiveness, I had no complaints. And just the actual getting around the system, it's not bad. And I think
it's mostly when you want to go into things like adjusting the massaging seats, or some of the more esoteric stuff. That's when you start to dive around in those menus.
Yeah.
But most of the stuff you use most frequently, like the climate control, is right there.
Yeah.
You got physical buttons, the tuning and volume knobs are there. So most of the time you don't have to do too much.
Yeah. The thing that I didn't like is, especially if you're using nav, you need to press the buttons. You need to press 2 buttons to get the zoom of the screen. So you've got to press controls. If it's been sitting there for a while, you have to press controls to bring up the controls, and then you've got a plus and a minus to zoom the map view, which that's a lot of paying attention to the screen when you're, possibly somewhere unfamiliar, and you've got to be poking at this, and you're trying to hit touch targets and stuff. So that seems crappy.
That's why you should use Android Auto.
Does that just pinch at that point? Yeah. So yeah, there's some of that. CarPlay. And I haven't used Android Auto, but CarPlay, what I don't like about it is that it really is, it's like a phone projection. So there are sometimes things that you want like last time we used CarPlay was my wife was on her phone and she was a passenger and we had it hooked up to the system via CarPlay.
Oh, don't even get me started on this.
So like I'm trying to look at nav and she's on the phone and we're trying to listen to music and it's just like it's messing with everything. So at a certain point I was like, you know what, forget it. We're just going to listen via Bluetooth and we're not going to use CarPlay. And like it's hard to sort of find that sort of sweet spot because people do actually share devices in the vehicle, but it's very driver centric. And that's something they're going to have to figure out. And I have faith that they'll get there eventually. But, the sync system, like I didn't have any complaint about that. The voice recognition needs to be better. It's natural language recognition is okay. Or at least it's been programmed with phrases where it works decently, but some of the quirks were like when I'm in a location and I try to find a destination, like, so we're in Massachusetts and I'm looking for a destination in Maine. I've got to go through a lot more like menu steps by voice command to tell it like find a different state, kind of stuff, which was,
and that's a common problem on most built-in infotainment systems. It's not just sync. I mean, most systems have that issue.
Yeah. But it is like if you can figure out the sort of the voice tree of commands, and it'll walk you through it for the most part. It's not bad to use the voice commands to set destinations and find things like that. That's getting better. So like I'm a full size SUV believer. My faith is it's a little shaken by the price tag because this one in Platinum Max or Max Platinum or whatever, it's $75,000 or more, depending on how you option it. But it starts at 75, whereas I think the Max starts at 51, like the base model. So that's a pretty healthy spread. Decide what you want. The Platinum is nice, very nice. I definitely pick it over the Navigator, just because I found it more pleasing and comfortable and like more normal and less gimmicky. But that's a lot of dough, and it's a lot of vehicle for the money. Even so, it's very refined, and it's possibly, I think, of the full size SUVs where there's really only a couple, like, because you've got the Toyota Sequoia that doesn't really count anymore because it's never been updated. But you've got
the real competitors are the GM trucks, the GM utilities. I think the Tahoe, Suburban, the Suburban and the Yukon XL, are the competitors for the Expedition Max, and then the Tahoe and the Yukon, the base Yukon are, for the standard length.
And I haven't driven those. I mean, they've been out for a while, but they just haven't made their way.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be all new ones coming next year. Because you got the trucks, the new pickup trucks are rolling out now. We'll probably see the new utilities in January at the Detroit Auto Show.
Yeah. LED headlights are fantastic. The rotary shift dial is not packaged well. I'm just going through my notes here. It needs more haptic feedback so you can operate it without as much attention and know what gear you're in. And the adaptive cruise is very good. That's what I wrote in my notes. And then from that,
take notes.
I do. From that, I've spent the last few days in the Honda Insight Touring. This is my favorite hybrid car ever. It's really, really well done. It's hard not to like the Touring trim because it's dressed up nicely. The materials are good. It reminds me of old school Honda, where everything is just, it's carefully considered. The materials look nice. They feel nice. They're put together well. It's kind of a conservative design, I think. And really, like, it's based on the Civic, but it's the size of the Accord from not too long ago. I actually mistook it for an Accord when it first arrived. It's not small. It's got an enormous trunk. It's got like a 15 cubic foot trunk. It's very roomy inside. They moved the seating position low, which is okay. But I think they actually did the sort of like the lower, wider. I don't know how much of the longer they did, but that old trope, lower, longer, wider. Man, this is just a good car. I'm convinced that they're not making any money on these at $28,000. Like, it's just
not necessarily, because the thing is, if you actually start going and if you start to look at the feature sheet compared to the Civic, because this is essentially a Civic hybrid. The rear fenders and the roof are common to the Civic. All the other sheet metal is unique for the Insight.
All the exterior sheet metal. Right?
Yeah, the exterior sheet metal.
There's a new nose too. Yeah.
But if you look at the corresponding trim levels, so like EX versus EX, LX versus LX, and the Touring versus Touring, the Insight trim levels actually have a little less equipment. Each one has a little bit less equipment than what's in the corresponding Civic. So that's offsetting the cost of the hybrid system. But and then the other thing is the hybrid system is the same system that's in the new Accord hybrid, and also what's in the Clarity plug-in hybrid. So you have the same drive unit, the same hybrid drive unit that's in all three of those. So they're by getting volumes up, they're getting the cost down on all of those.
That's impressive, because all the car stuff is perfect. It drives about as well as it's going to for being a hybrid like this, and it's very efficient. I'm getting like 47 miles per gallon with it, and I'm not driving economically. I'm just driving normally. I will say that this hybrid system, while it's good, most of the time when you need sort of max power, it feels a little rubber bandy, and it feels a little anemic when you really get on it. But other than that, it's fine. And it'll definitely crank the speedometer right around without a problem. It's just when you want that sort of like maximum acceleration, it does the old style sort of CVT thing where the engine just revs up and drones a little bit, and you get forward progress, but it still feels weird. But they've done about as much as they can do to just refine it. I know it's got extra sound deadening from the Civic. They tried to make it quiet. I think it's actually quietest in class.
It's got active noise control.
Yeah. It's a really it's a good place to be, and I was just so impressed because I was like, I just really like this as a car. I don't care what it's moved by. I don't care what powers it. It's a good car. And again, it's got a bunch of features that for the money seem to actually push the level of sort of value, stuff I wouldn't expect on a $28,000 car, like the Touring trim level with its leather and LED headlights, and the new infotainment system is probably the best one that they've done so far. It actually has a knob, but it's only got one knob. They need two knobs. They need a tuning knob.
I thought I had two.
No,
I had a tuning knob too.
No, not. It's got.
Okay. So it's got the system from the CRV.
Yeah.
Not the one that's in the Accord.
Yeah.
This does not look like the one in the CRV that I drove, and the one in the CRV that I drove, I remember being deep. It just blew everywhere and looked like it was designed easily 5 to 10 years ago. And now it supported like CarPlay, so it was clearly a modern unit, but aesthetically, oh God, it was bad. Now I'm one of those annoying Apple users that's all about design and all that grumbly stuff that makes everyone crazy, but it was just hideous to look at. It was awful. That's the software. Like physically, the screen was fine, the buttons around it were fine, but the software, the stock Honda software was terrible. And just looking at a picture here, it does not look quite so bad. What I'm seeing here.
Yeah, no, the Insight has newer software that's the same as what's in the Accord and the Odyssey now. So it's an updated interface. But I'm just looking at the hardware part of it.
What I have found is when you're designing user interface and UX stuff, often you need to sacrifice pretty for works, and a lot of the stuff that works the best is ugly. Because think about the car environment, right? And that's what this Honda system has large touch targets when you hit the home button or whatever to get all of the different functions. They're big. It's not like the Ford system that we were talking about where the icons are much smaller. The icons are big here. Well, that's good. That's what you want, because when you're driving down the road, you're going to use your index finger to reach out, and it's going to wobble around. So you want to be able to hit those things. So I like that. I like the responsiveness of the system and how it seems so far pretty intuitive to use. And Honda systems have not been great historically. You know, the cars themselves are good, but their infotainment has lagged, especially when they were doing the 2-screen nonsense that they're.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So
those were bad.
This is a very positive step forward. You know, they continue to make improvements, and they're all sort of figuring out what's necessary and what's not. And I like how they're not just throwing up their hands and going like, use the Android Auto or use CarPlay. We're done, guys. Like, all we're going to put is a radio.
They do continue to improve it.
Yeah.
You know, and you know the funny thing is, all of Honda's infotainment systems for the last several years, going back to the Civic, they're actually running on Android. If you dig down if you go into the settings and go into system settings, you'll see that they're actually running AOSP Android. And the Civic, like the one we have, is running on Android 4.2.
4.2 is the Jelly Bean?
Yeah. And oh no, actually it's 4.4, which is
ice cream sandwich or
ice cream sandwich. Yeah. These newer ones are running Android 6.0.
I don't know what that one is. All I know is Pi is coming.
Yeah, well, Pi's here. I've got Pi on my phone now.
Oh, nice.
But I think that was what L. I don't know. Anyway, it's an updated one. But the funny thing is, if you go in there, you can actually, and you dig around, you can actually find the Android AOSP web browser in there. And there's a the car has these systems all have Wi-Fi in there, so that when your car's in the garage, if you set it up on your home Wi-Fi, it'll do OTA updates over the Wi-Fi. And so, when you're sitting in the garage, you can actually tap in there, open up the browser, and open stuff in the old, ancient Android AOSP browser.
That's pretty funny.
That's great.
And looking at this is definitely far and away much, much, much prettier than the CRV I had. This is much less offensive, and I would even go so far as to say it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I'm impressed with it. It still has some things that I would like to change. It feels like it doesn't have enough physical controls, or the physical controls it has aren't quite right. Like, so if you've got volume on a knob, why is tuning on a rocker? Like, stop it. But it's getting better, and it's hasn't given me fits. So yeah, I mean we've consumed a good bit of the podcast on cars, but we had a lot to get through. And I think hopefully we offered a bunch of actual insights, no pun intended. So yeah, let's move on to some topical material. And Sam, we have a few things we wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we don't need to get to all of these. We can hit a couple of these. One thing, 2 days ago, when I was in Silicon Valley visiting a company that shall remain unnamed, I actually saw a Jaguar I-Pace in the wild for the first time.
Ooh,
what'd you think?
And it looks really good. But more interestingly, my two colleagues that were with me were really impressed with it. They thought it was fantastic. I mean, I've liked the I-Pace ever since I saw the original concept at LA a couple of years ago, and it looks really good on the road. And I think it's going to do well for Jaguar.
What are the initial reviews like? Because I'm loosely familiar with it, but I haven't really read up.
The British ones were fawning.
Yeah,
well, but that's to be expected, right?
Yeah, no, even the American reviews are extremely positive. Pretty much all the reviews I've seen have been very positive of it. My friend Richard Truitt at Automotive News went to Portugal for the media drive, and he was just raving about the thing. And when they did the media drive there, what they did was they had an on-road drive route. They spent half a day at a track. So you get to drive, lap it at the track. And they also had an off-road section, like, a real Jeep style off-road, Jeep Land Rover style off-road section. And, they said it did great on everything. It's not quite as, it's not as fast as a Model X, in a drag race, because The initial version is a mere 400 horsepower.
Who cares? I'm so sick of the electric car drag race thing. That's just like,
I know. I mean, it'll go 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. I mean, how much faster do you need it to be?
That's fast.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the site now. It's 4.5 seconds. I remember vividly when I was a kid looking at supercars like the Diablo, which was roundabout stuff like 4 seconds flat, I think. I mean, this is ridiculous.
So it's plenty fast enough. But there will be faster versions coming down the road. I mean, there'll be, an SVR version and things like that. But it looks really good. It doesn't have that kind of bulbous, blown up look of the Model X. It's not as large as the Model X either. But I think people are going to really like it, and I'm looking forward to seeing and getting a chance to drive one hopefully pretty soon. And then also the coming next month in San Francisco, I'll be in San Francisco on September 17th for the global reveal of the Audi e-tron Quattro, which will also be arriving before the end of the year. And that's their all-wheel drive electric crossover, which, between the two of those, there's going to be some serious challengers for Tesla, in the next few months.
Well, so that's something that I think they may not have counted on is when they first started off with the, certainly with the Roadster, but then the Model S, they kind of had the market to themselves. And then the Model S pushed everybody to realize that, no, this is the thing. Like, people will pay premium money for these cars, and they will burnish your reputation. And while, Audi and Porsche and other automakers may not have quite the EV green, we're saving the world cachet as a Tesla, they know how to make cars, and they know how to get them to market. And if you're waiting on your Tesla now because the lines are capacity constrained and you can't get your car, you can walk over to the Audi dealer or the Jaguar dealer, and you can get a car.
Yeah. And also, if you actually need service on it, you probably won't have to wait 3 months for parts.
Yeah. Yeah. So not to just like pick on Tesla, like those things are difficult even for large manufacturers to do on a consistent basis. And that's why there's often complaints from folks about, getting their car serviced. Like it's a normal part of the business. But it seems like the old line, I guess, automakers have it figured out a lot better.
Yeah, they understand the importance of the supply chain, and for the most part, unless you've got something that's particularly rare, you can usually get parts for pretty much anything within a few days. So that's usually not so much of a problem.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of, Casey, you mentioned, supercars of yore, when we were all a little bit younger than we are now. One of those, that was one of the classic pieces of automotive vaporware, or just slightly less than vaporware, was a company called Vector. Do you remember Vector?
No, I don't think I do.
Jerry Weigert.
Oh, yeah.
Vector. Oh, yep. You should Google the W8.
I have no doubt that at some point in your life you have seen pictures or posters of the Vector W8.
Yeah, this does ring a bell.
Yeah.
What's the other? Oh no, it's not. That the Consigliere was the one with the Chrysler
that
Turbo.
That was Warren Mosler.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah, that was something else entirely.
Sure was.
Yeah. Certainly, it wasn't anything I'd ever actually like to look at for any length of time.
It went, though. Man, did that car go.
Oh, yeah. God, was it ugly.
I was trying to outrun its reflection. All right, moving on. Yeah,
somebody is trying to revive Vector. It's not clear if Mr. Weigert has anything to do with this effort, but there are currently a pair of WX3 prototypes for sale. They're listed on the DuPont registry, being sold as a pair for $3.5 million, which is
that's apparently cheap.
Meant to kickstart a revival of Vector with a new car. I don't know how far you're going to get with $3.5 million.
Oh man, but the WX3, like that just looks old now.
Yeah, well,
because it is.
Yeah,
a 7-liter twin turbocharged V8 with a 3-speed automatic. Oh my goodness!
Oh well, I mean that's like a turbo hydromatic 700R, right? Like
I mean it's I mean.
Listen, that is like
a V8 like that. As long as you can keep it running, there's plenty of torque in there. You don't need very many gears.
No.
Fair.
Like what?
Fact, having fewer gears, means it's less likely to break.
Right, it can handle more torque. But it's like this is, this is state of 1992.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I don't know how much, Dan, you remember about the history of Vector in the 1990s.
Jerry Weigert is a lunatic.
There is that.
Didn't he have the twin engine like STS or something too?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But at some point along the way there, after what seemed like decades of trying to get his cars into anything resembling series production. They finally ran out of money, and the company got taken over by an Indonesian company,
right,
which
Avtec,
right, which had previously also bought Lamborghini from Chrysler.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Neither did I.
Yeah. So when Chrysler sold off Lamborghini, they sold it to an Indonesian company, and like a year or two later, they also bought Vector when it ran out of money. And so I think there were, maybe a dozen or so of these WX3s that were built with that twin turbo V8, which was based on a Chevy small block.
Of course it was.
Yeah. Why not?
No complaints.
Yeah. But they, so what happened was they had moved production to a facility in Green Cove Springs, Florida, which is near Jacksonville.
Listen, anything that goes to Florida, like this is just like, that's it. That's not going to end well. You know it.
And so, and as it happens, the company, at the time I was working for Kelsey Hayes, working on ABS and traction control systems. And we had a test facility in Green Cove Springs. There was this sort of industrial park on a retired Naval Air Station in Green Cove Springs. And so we had a test facility there. We used a couple of the runways for the old runways for doing ABS testing. And in one of the other buildings on that same property is where Avtec moved the production of these vehicles into, and they re-engineered this thing to utilize the Lamborghini V12 from, I guess it was probably the Diablo at that point.
Yeah.
Instead of the original V8 setup, because since they already had access to those V12s and they were being produced, so they re-engineered it. I think they rebadged it as the M12. And I remember being down there, at our test track, and occasionally you'd see one of these things, moving around a little bit, or at least you could see them, sitting outside of the building where they were being built. And a few years later, when the company, went under again, the place had been abandoned, but there were a handful of the tube frame chassis for these things that were sitting outside on a rack, just rusting away.
Huh, that's terrible. You said it was the WX3 that's going up for auction?
Yeah, there's two prototypes. I
was going to say, it looks like, as per Wikipedia, those are the only two WX3s ever built.
Okay, yeah, they may well be. There's a coupe and a roadster, and so they're being sold as a matching set. So if you're interested in one, no guarantee that they will actually function for any length of time, but they're out there, and we'll include the link to the Jalopnik post in the show notes.
I still now I really want to find out what happened with Consigliere.
Oh, they went belly up too.
Yeah.
Although they stuck around surprisingly long. Warren Mosler kept that whole thing going for a surprising amount of time. They sold a fair number of them.
Yeah. it's such a it's so 80s. It's such a bonkers car. It looks like he laid up the body like on forms in his garage.
He probably did.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Next topic.
Let's see. Do we want?
Do you want to talk about what defines genius? We could talk about. We can get real. No. All right.
We'll do that one next time.
Okay.
That's going to take too long.
All right. We're going to get very philosophical.
Yeah. Okay. That's going to be another Elon Musk rant. So we'll leave that one for another time.
All right.
And then we don't need to talk about the Ford AV safety report either. Let's just call it a night.
Okay.
I think that's good.
Do you want to answer a question?
Yeah. We had one question from John Wilson, who he asked, what's the best way to measure combined power, gas and electric in hybrid cars? After driving the Kia Niro, I'm impressed with the power delivery when in sport mode on the shifter. I'm curious to compare power in sport to other cars, hybrid and traditional. So basically, what this comes down to is, you're going to add, however much power the engine is producing to however much power and torque the electric motor is producing. However, the peak amount of power that any particular hybrid makes and the peak amount of power and torque that the electric motors make probably will not equal. There will probably be, if you add those numbers together, they will probably be somewhat more than whatever the rated combined power is by the manufacturer, because what they're doing is they're controlling all this stuff in software. So when you're driving in blended power mode, you're going to get a mix, and they're usually restricting the amount of power from one or the other in order to try to maximize the overall efficiency of the system. So, like, for example, the Honda Insight you were driving, Dan, I think if you added up what the engine is capable of and what the electric motors are capable of, it's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 175, 180 horsepower. But I think the actual rated combined power for that one is somewhere, I think it's about 155 roughly. So, what they're typically doing with these things is they're tuning it to hit certain fuel economy numbers, to match whatever their fuel economy budget is, for their fleet average fuel economy, and trying to balance what they think is enough power for the vehicle and hit whatever their targets are, and whatever if you manage to get into the software and hack it, you could probably get more combined power out of it than what they actually produce from the factory.
See, that sounds like something Casey and his buddies can help us with.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't.
How's your skills at embedded code, Casey?
I did some in school. What was it? A Motorola HC11 I was writing assembly for, and that was a long time ago. I enjoyed it, but it was a long time ago.
These are probably running some kind of ARM chip at this point.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Something a lot better than the HC11 I was using, I assure you. But I have fun with it.
Back in the day, I was writing assembly code for Intel ADC196.
That was a couple of years ago.
Wait, an 80 series processors? That's a while ago.
Yeah.
Right,
it's basically a variant of the original IBM PC chip.
Right, that was the 8086, right? Was the
Mm-hmm.
Or an 8080 was the original, right?
Yeah, there were variations, different bus widths, but so this was the 196, which was a microcontroller version of it.
Wow.
And we had a grand total of 12 kilobytes of ROM.
ROM.
64 bytes of RAM.
Oh God.
And we had to squeeze a whole ABS system into that.
But so that's,
oh my word,
that's like the Apollo stuff too. Like, you know what that makes for is it makes those limitations make really elegant, clever solutions where now we have
clever,
code
yes.
bloat.
Yeah,
clever, yes. I don't know about elegant, but
clever,
yes.
I don't know.
I mean, it depends on how you define elegant.
Just like so.
Let's put it this way: it requires some creativity,
right? Then that's the interesting thing to me is like there's a lot of people who are like, well, can you make a fuel injection system based around an Arduino? And like, yes, you can, but you do have to get creative around the limitations of the chip, and just say like, and I forget exactly, what some of those limitations are, but some of the solutions are just sort of like just fantastically clever. And you're like, oh, I never would have thought of doing it that way. That's really interesting. And it's like, that's some of the things that were done for, the fuel injection systems back in the 80s, 70s and 80s, but because they just didn't have the raw processing speed. So you had to do other things to make it work and be robust and stuff. So anyway, we're completely off track now, but yeah, if you want to get the combined powers, so the other thing that seems weird to me about like combining the power of the electric motor and the gas engine is that the electric motor's peak torque is at 0 RPM. And so how does that work when you're combining it with a system that's all about spinning?
And this is one of the reasons why, in hybrid vehicles, they always retune the engine to run on an Atkinson cycle, because the Atkinson cycle is much more efficient. So what they do is they keep the intake valve open longer, so that as the piston goes past top dead center, the intake valve stays open longer, and you end up having a shorter effective compression stroke and a longer power stroke, and it's more efficient, but it produces a lot less torque. But because the electric motor produces its torque right from 0 RPM, it fills that torque hole, and so you still have acceptable performance.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
See,
these are the kinds of things you learn from listening to the Wheelbearings podcast.
Yeah, I know. See, I am so far behind on all of my podcasts. It is ridiculous. Turns out when you aren't just slogging away at code all day, you have less time for listening to podcasts, which is the one small bummer.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. I have the problem where if I'm listening to a podcast and trying to do other tasks, such as like write copy.
Oh yeah,
I can't concentrate.
Yeah, writing in podcasts don't work so well.
No, sometimes you start
code or copy or articles.
Sometimes you start transcribing what you're listening to by mistake. Like, oh wait. See, all right.
One more thing about the computing power. Last weekend I was writing my next column for Automotive Engineering magazine, and I was thinking because I'd been reading. What was I reading? I was reading Larry Burns' new book on the development of autonomous vehicles, and we're going to have an interview with him in a couple of weeks when the book comes out. But in there, there's a section that talks a little bit about the computing, or I had a question about the computing power on the Chevy Tahoe that won the DARPA Urban Challenge in 2008. So I sent a note to Brian Selesky, who's the CEO at Argo AI, and he led the software design effort on that vehicle. And this was in 2006 when this thing was built, and it ran in 2007. And the back of the Chevy Tahoe was filled with a rack of computers. They had 10 blade servers, each one with a 2.1 gigahertz Core 2 Duo chip on it. And I looked up the specs on this thing, and it had a Whetstone benchmark of like 180 million instructions per second on each of those chips. So combined, you could have a theoretical max of like 1.8 billion instructions per second. And the stuff that they're running today for autonomous vehicles, the latest, the NVIDIA Xavier chip, which they're starting to ship to customers now, that thing is rated at 30 teraflops. So that's like 15,000 times faster, 15,000 times more performance than what was in that Tahoe that won the DARPA Urban Challenge. And the next generation one that they're starting to test now is the NVIDIA Drive Pegasus system. That one is 320 teraflops.
Yeah, but that's the difference too. Like the Intel Core 2 Duos, that's a general purpose.
Oh yeah,
processor versus
the fact that they're using GPUs now. makes a huge difference in the performance.
Are GPUs like they're not like, what are GPUs made up of? Is it like FPGAs, or is it just like?
No, they're well, Casey, do you want to answer?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've looked at this sort of stuff. I live in software. I don't live in hardware anymore.
Yeah. So
listen, your software needs a place to run, buddy.
Yeah, but that's all magic, man. I don't have to worry about that.
The individual cores they're architected a little different, but they're more simplified compared to a CPU, compared to a general purpose CPU. They're more RISC-like,
right?
The reduced instruction set. But the thing is, they're highly parallelized. So, instead of having 2 cores like a Core 2 Duo, some of these modern GPUs have like 300, 400, 500 cores on a chip. So you're running all these parallel instructions, and it's just insane performance. Also insane power consumption, but minor detail.
That's fine. We can heat up the water and split it into hydrogen.
Yeah.
And we've come full circle.
Hey.
Perfect. All right. With that, let's call it a night.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for joining us again.
Yep. Thank you so much, you guys, as always. It is always a pleasure. And anytime you get bored and want me to come on your show.
Hey, you've never ruined the show. You're always entertaining.
Listen, that's what I'm here for.
No, thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate it.
All right. Catch everyone next week.
See you all next time.